Happy New Year, one and all. I'm now going to be reviewing all of Week 17's action of the NFL season. It's hard to believe that we're only 1 week away from having the regular season end. We're 2 weeks away from the postseason beginning. It honestly feels like, and I've probably said this before, but it honestly feels like the season just got underway just yesterday. And now here we are, pretty much at the end of this 2023 campaign. So I'm going to be reviewing all the games from Thursday, Saturday, and all of Sunday's action. There were no Monday night games this week. It's kind of strange that they had the cast for Monday Night Football do the Saturday game, and I'll get to that in just a second. So technically, this past Saturday was the last Monday night game football, even though it happened on Saturday. It's a bit of a head scratcher, if you ask me. So as always, I'll be reviewing all the games, who won, who I picked, and at the end of this, I'll go through my weekly picks and my overall record as usual. So New York went into Cleveland to take on the Browns. I did predict Cleveland would get the victory, and boy oh boy did they ever win. They won by three scores, 37-20 would be the final in this one. So with the victory, the Browns have now improved to 11-5, and they're definitely making the postseason. It's just a matter of seeding where they're going to sit by the end of it. And with the loss, the Jets have already been eliminated. They're dropped to 6-10. All right. So, like I just finished saying, the lone game on Saturday was technically the Monday Night Football game. Again, it's hard to wrap my head around something like that. The Dallas Cowboys, they played host to the Detroit Lions. Now, I did predict that Dallas would get the victory, just like a lot of people predicted. And it was a very close game and a very controversial finish at the end. I'm sure if you're a Lions fan, you're probably very bitter about how that game ended. But at the same note, if only you kicked the extra point, you could have been playing for overtime. So just the fact that the Lions, they scored a late touchdown, only had the 1 point differential at that point. They tried going for two on three different occasions. The first, they got an offensive penalty. The second one, was a defensive penalty. And then the third, it was an incompletion. So, if I was Lions fan, I'd be a little upset. But at the same time, why are you trying to play hero ball? If you kick the extra point, you're more than likely playing for overtime and you have a 50-50 chance of winning. But if you obviously go for a 2 point conversion late in the fourth quarter with no timeouts, then you're taking a huge gamble that you can possibly come away with a victory. If they had got the win, everyone would be looking at this team like, man, this guy is just unreal. This team is great. But when you lose in heartbreaking fashion like this, especially when it comes if you consider this, that they were fighting for like a number two spot in that NFC standings, but now with the loss, they're more than likely going to finish at least in the third spot of the NFC. So 20-19 would be the final score. With the loss, again, the Lions already have the NFC North wrapped up. They're at 11-5. They have identical records with the Cowboys. They are now atop of their division in the NFC East, and if they happen to win out next week, they can easily finish second in that NFC. So a very, very crucial game for both of these teams, and the Cowboys got the victory in the end. All right, the rest of the games took place on Sunday. The first one was in Baltimore, where we had two of the top teams in the AFC duke it out. So coming into this matchup, I was a little skeptical when it came to the Dolphins, only because the only time they beat an actual very competitive team was when they beat the Cowboys just the previous week. But then they came into Baltimore and got absolutely destroyed. 56-19 was the final score. The Ravens, with the victory, not only secured their 13th win of the season, but they got the top record in the AFC. So even if they happen to lose their Week 18 matchup, it doesn't affect their standings at all. I can guarantee they're probably going to rest a lot of players next week because they've already clinched home field advantage. What else do you have to play for? Aside from pride. So I would not be shocked if going into Week 18, if the Ravens happen to rest a lot of their starters just so they can be ready for the divisional round of the postseason. As for the Dolphins, if they had been able to get a victory, they would have been able to claim that AFC East crown, but because they lost, now they're fighting for their division title lives when it looked like just 2-3 weeks ago that they had that division wrapped up. They have now are sitting at 11-5. So again, a very crucial game next week to claim that AFC East crown. All right. The next matchup takes place in Buffalo, where we had the Bills, and they played host to the New England Patriots. So a battle of the AFC East. One team with the Patriots have already been eliminated, and the Bills are still fighting for a playoff spot. And as I just mentioned with the Dolphins, they're in a dogfight for that AFC East crown. So I did predict that the Bills would get the victory. They sure did. 27-21 would be the final score from that particular game. The New England Patriots have now dropped to 4-12. Again, no postseason action in Foxborough. And for the Bills, I believe they play the Dolphins next week. So it's a very big game for both of those teams to see who's going to get home field advantage and who's going to be getting a 5th or potential 6th spot in that AFC wildcard. All right. The next matchup takes place in Chicago, where we have the Bears, and they played host to the Atlanta Falcons. So coming into this game, a very critical game for the Falcons. I did predict that Chicago would get the victory, but there was a lot on the line for the Falcons. If they had been able to get the victory over the Bears, they'd still be in contention for a wildcard spot or a division crown spot, because that NFC South is very weak. But now that they've lost to the Bears, the final score was 37-17, so it wasn't even close. They lost by 20 points. The Bears have now improved to 7-9. No postseason action in Chicago. And as for the Atlanta Falcons, they've also dropped to 7-9, and they've pretty much put themselves out of commission of making a postseason appearance. The only way they could get in is if the Saints and Buccaneers both lose and they all finish with an 8-9 record, or if other teams that are chasing an NFC wildcard spot happen to finish with an 8-9 record, then there's a slim pick of chance the Falcons could catch up to them. But again, a very tough loss if you're a Falcons fan to take, and a very roller coaster season. But again, you can say the same thing for the Saints and the Buccaneers as well. All right, the next matchup takes place in the AFC South, where we have the Houston Texans, and they're taking on the Tennessee Titans. So for the Titans, at this point in the season, they've already known they've been eliminated. They're just trying to play spoiler at this point. They were coming into this matchup at 5-10. The Texans were sitting at 8-7. I did predict that Houston would get the victory, and man, they blew out the Titans. 26-3 would be the final score from this one. So with the victory, the Houston Texans have now improved to 9-7, and the Titans have dropped to 5-11. So there's not much I can also really talk about with the Titans, other than a very lost season to say the least. As for the Houston Texans, that AFC South is so crowded, and I will get to the Colts and the Jaguars here in momentarily, but a lot of those teams are sitting at 9-7, and it's hard to believe that there's like a 3-way tie pretty much for first in that division. So next week is going to be very critical for all 3 of those teams, as there's a good chance one of those teams could be bounced out of the postseason. Because the Browns have already locked in the playoff spot, so it's just the Bills, Colts, Texans, and I will get to the other team in just a second, the Steelers. It's pretty much like a 4-way tie for like that last or second, third last spot of that AFC wildcard. But, I mean, for the Texans, they could easily get a victory next week if the Jaguars happen to lose, and then they could be looking at AFC South champions. And who would have guessed that at the start of the season? So a lot of scenarios can happen for this Houston Texans squad. A lot to play for in the last week of the season. All right. Speaking of the AFC South, the Indianapolis Colts were in action, and they took on the Las Vegas Raiders. So I'm not sure why, but I did peg that the Raiders would get the victory only because they beat the Chiefs last week, and I thought they'd be able to bring that momentum into Indianapolis. And if you can beat the Chiefs, you can sure beat the Colts. Oh, wait, no, you can't. 23-20 would be the final score in favor of Indy. So just like the Texans, the Colts are also 9-7. Like I said, it's like a 3-way tie pretty much for that first place in that division. And as we speak, only the Colts or Texans could make the postseason. If the playoffs started right now, the Colts would have the number 7 seed. So the Texans are technically on the outside looking in, But again, they all have the same identical record. And so it's going to be very crucial when once week 18 is done to see which teams are in and which teams are out. As for the Raiders, with the loss, they've now dropped to 7-9. So there's no postseason action in the state of Nevada. All right. Staying in the AFC South, we're off to Jacksonville, where they took on the Carolina Panthers. I feel like this was a game that the Jaguars desperately needed because it seemed like they were kind of spiraling out of control at the end of the season when it looked like they had that division locked like weeks ago. And just inconsistency and losing streaks, it just has not been the season that they had expected. But this was a game that they needed to win if they wanted to try and stay in contention for not only a playoff spot, but a division crown as well. So they were coming in this matchup at 8-7. The Panthers were coming in this matchup at 2-13. The Jaguars got a shutout victory, 26-0 was the final score. So with that, they've improved to 9-7. They are still technically first in that division, despite having a three-way tie with the Texans and the Colts. So a very critical matchup next week for the Jaguars if they want to be able to secure their second consecutive AFC South title. As for the Panthers, this season just can't end soon enough. I'm sure they're looking forward to the draft and offseason and stuff like that. So for the Panthers, they have really nothing else to play for at this point, unless they can play spoiler in Week 18 with the team that they play against. All right. So we are now off to New York, where the Giants played host to the Los Angeles Rams. Okay. So coming in this matchup, the Giants are sitting at 5-10. No postseason action in the state of New York for them. And the Rams are still fighting for a playoff spot at 8-7. This was a very close game, back and forth kind of a thing. 26-25 would be the final score. You can't get any closer than a 1-point differential between two teams. So with the victory, the Rams now improved to 9-7. Again, they still are in that fifth or sixth spot, if I'm not mistaken, in the NFC. So if they can get a win next week, they can almost lock in that sixth spot as the Seahawks are breathing down their neck as well for a postseason berth. All right. The next matchup takes place in Philadelphia, where we have the Eagles, and they played host to the Arizona Cardinals. So I think everybody and their mother would have predicted that the Eagles would have gotten the victory, especially over a 3-win Arizona Cardinals team, which has been lost all season long. But the Cardinals went into Philadelphia and upset the Eagles. Man, every time I pick the Eagles, especially this late in the season, they seem to absolutely bomb. So I'm telling you right now, I don't know who they're playing in Week 18, but I'm going to go against them. It's just unbelievable. They've already clinched the playoff spot, but they're fighting for a division crown when like 2 or 3 weeks ago, it looked like they were going to be the best team in the NFC ever. And now they're lucky if they get into a wild card spot. It's just unbelievable how poorly they've been playing this late in the season. 35-31 would be the final score. Cardinals are 4-12. Again, no postseason action in that state. And the only way the Eagles at this point will be in the playoffs, well, I'm getting all tongue-tied. They have secured a playoff spot, but right now they're looking at a wild card spot at best. And yeah, it's not, I'm sure, at all what anyone in that organization wanted. Like I said, especially when they were so dominant for the first 2/3 of this season. Now it seems like the last 3 or 4 games, they've like completely unfolded and they're looking like a shell of themselves, to say the least. All right. So I did pick the Eagles. They did lose. All right. Now we're off to the NFC South, where we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the New Orleans Saints. So honestly, I'm not going to lie. I honestly thought that the Buccaneers, because they won the previous week, they'd be able to get this victory and secure an NFC South for the second consecutive year. But the Saints had a slight change of plans. 23-13 would be the final score. Both these teams are now sitting at 8-8, heading into the final week of the regular season. So for the Buccaneers, this was a game that got away from them and a game that they should have won. But the Saints, like I said, they're still fighting for themselves. So both these teams are locked in, basically tied for first in that NFC South division. I don't think they're playing each other again in back-to-back weeks. So a very critical game for both the Saints and Buccaneers when it comes to Week 18. Not only is it going to decide who is in for the NFC South crown, but maybe the other team gets bounced out of a postseason berth, or maybe whoever doesn't get the NFC South can squeak into a wild card spot. There's a lot of crazy scenarios that can happen, especially in that NFC. All right, now we're off to Washington, where we have the Commanders, and they're taking on the San Francisco 49ers. So I did predict that San Fran would get the victory in this one, and they sure did. 27-10 would be the final score. With the victory, the 49ers have now secured the first round bye in the NFC. They got the number one seed in that conference. They're sitting at 12-4. So just like the Ravens, I would be surprised if the 49ers rested a lot of their players, because that'd be like 2 weeks of rest, because you'd be resting week 18, you'd be resting your wild card, and then you'd have everyone all set for the division matchup, whoever you may play against. And for the Washington Commanders, obviously the only thing that they're waiting for is the draft, as they've now dropped to 4-12, and we'll see where they're at when the regular season standings are complete. All right, now off to Seattle, where we had the Seahawks taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, so I was a little bold on this one. I thought that the Seahawks would have been able to get the victory in this matchup, but unfortunately they just fell short. Final score was 30-23 in favor of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has now improved to 9-7. They are still in contention for that AFC wildcard spot. And as for the Seahawks, despite the loss at 8-8, they're also kind of neck and neck when it comes to the postseason action. They're still fighting for their playoff lives come next week. So both these teams are very much still alive, but again, a lot are on the stakes for Week 18. All right, off to the AFC West, where we have the Kansas City Chiefs, and they're playing host to the Cincinnati Bengals. So I was a little bold on this one. I thought because the Chiefs have been so inconsistent, and I think they lost like 2 of their last 3 games coming into this matchup, they didn't look like the team of destiny, in my opinion. With that being said, they ended up beating the Bengals 25-17. So I was wrong on this particular pick. With the victory, the Chiefs now improved to 10-6. They have secured what I just believe I read was their 8th consecutive AFC West crown. It's outstanding of how well this team has done since Peyton Manning retired. And with the loss, the Bengals dropped to 8-8. They've now officially been eliminated from the postseason. All the other teams in that AFC wildcard have 9, 10, 11 wins respectively. So, for the Bengals, unfortunately, there is no postseason action in the state of Ohio, at least for that particular city. Just goes to show how important Joe Burrow was to this team before he was lost to an injury. And we'll see how the Bengals do in 2024. All right, staying in the AFC West, we have the Los Angeles Chargers, and they went in to Denver to take on the Broncos. So, because the Broncos lost so horribly last weekend against the Patriots, especially on Christmas Eve, I picked against them in this matchup. And the main reason was because the inconsistency of play and the benching of Russell Wilson. I didn't know how much faith I'd really have in Jason Stidham to be the starting quarterback the last 2 weeks of the season, let alone win one of the 2 matchups that they are going to play. But he came to play, and their defense was on par. 16-9 would be the final score in this one. With that, the Denver Broncos have now brought themselves back to 500 at 8-8. And even with that, they have still been eliminated from the postseason. And with the loss, the Chargers have now dropped to 5-11. And obviously, there's no playoffs in the state of California, at least for this particular team. Okay, now the last game took place on Sunday night in the NFC North between the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers. So coming into this matchup, I did predict that Green Bay would get the victory, and man, oh man, they blew out the Vikings. 33-10 would be the final score. So with the loss, the Vikings, they have now officially been eliminated from the postseason. With the victory, The Green Bay Packers have now improved to 8-8, or I guess got back to 500 at 8-8, and they're now still fighting for a postseason spot. I'll just take a look at the standings here. Just a quick second. Oh no, my phone just froze. Yeah, so as of right now, the Packers have the number 7 seed. The Rams have the number 6 seed. The Eagles have the number 5th seed. The Seahawks are just on the outside of the playoffs, but they have the same identical record as the Packers at 8-8. So the Eagles are technically 8th. The Saints are technically 8th as well. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams. 4 teams are still fighting for 2 playoff spots, as I mentioned previously, as the Eagles have already locked in a playoff berth. It's just a matter of whether they finish as a wild card or a division champ. That's going to be very critical for this team moving forward. But yeah, the Rams 9-7, Packers 8-8. They are the 6th and 7th teams respectively, while the Seahawks and Saints are both breathing down their necks. So a lot of teams are fighting for 2 playoff spots come week 18. So with week 17 recap, I finished with a 10-6 record. Not too great, but not too bad. Which now improves my overall record to 144-92. So as long as I don't get 8 games wrong next week, I will finish with at least, hopefully, below 100 losses on the season. As always, if you're new to this channel and you like this type of content, please feel free to hit the sub button. I'd be very grateful and very appreciative as well. And until next time, take care.